Shabbat Shalom. I had somebody recently ask me about the excommunication of Spinoza, and I have to say that topic doesn't come up all that often. So I realized that I probably hadn't filled in everyone else about this topic, and so, well, here we are. First of all, we have to understand what we mean in Judaism when we use the term excommunication or a neder of cherem. Well, to understand that, we have to understand what it's not. The word excommunication is, of course, an English term, and it comes with a lot of Catholic baggage. In the Catholic Church, if someone is excommunicated, what does that mean for them? What's that? They're out of the community. Oh, so that's no big deal, right? They go to hell. Right? Because if you are excommunicado, if you are out of the community, you can no longer take communion or indeed have any of the other sacraments, any of the other features of Catholicism, which are the path through which Catholicism believes you are saved from hell. So if you are excommunicated, you go to hell forever. That is the repercussion. That's not the Jewish understanding. The community doesn't get to decide who they want to send to hell permanently because, well, any punishment we receive in the afterlife is proportional to the actual crimes that we committed in this life. And as no crime is infinite, therefore no punishment can be infinite. But we do have excommunication or cherem. Well, I'll use the words interchangeably for the purposes of this discussion in Judaism. It just doesn't get used all that often, and it didn't used to get used much more, except in very special circumstances. So, cherem, or excommunication in Judaism, means more like the literal root of the English word, that you are out of the community. That for a period of time, with various degrees, depending upon the infraction, the community will shun you. The community will not talk with you. The community will not do business with you. They will not be allowed to stand within 6 feet of you. That you are literally pushed outside of the community until you have fixed whatever problem it was for which you have been put under the ban of excommunication. So what sort of problems might we have seen excommunication used in our historical past? Anybody got an example of something they would like to excommunicate a person for? What's that? To worship other gods. We didn't. You worship other gods, you're not getting an aliyah, right? You're not being accepted as a witness, but cherem wasn't usually the punishment for doing something like that. You see, the things that we would normally imagine as being, the big baddies, we didn't put somebody under excommunication for that because, well, either there were punishments already in place. If someone was a thief, if someone was a murderer, excommunication wasn't necessary because we were punishing them as a thief, as a murderer, and we took care of it along the normal lines of justice. Excommunication was used as a coercive tool to twist the arm of somebody who was refusing to comply with an important community decision. For example, if you had gone to court because your neighbor had accused you of stealing $1,000, not stealing, but cheating him out of $1,000 over an inheritance or something a little less clear than just stole it from your house, and the court agreed that you in fact owed your neighbor that $1,000, and you said, "Nuh-uh," well, in many times in our history, the Jewish community didn't have the ability to simply kick down your door and confiscate the funds, as would happen in a modern American court. And so we would put the person under cherem. We'd say, fine, a month of cherem should teach you a lesson. Let's see if anyone buys at your shop. Let's see if anybody sells you fruit. Let's see if anybody's willing to talk to you. And after a month of that, maybe you'll comply with the court's orders. We'll come back to Spinoza and similar, but this was the more general version. That cherem wasn't reserved for the biggie heretics. Cherem was used for people that were refusing to comply. If the court had said, you know what, this man needs to divorce his wife, and he's refusing to give her a get. He's not living with her. He is shacked up with someone else. He is not paying for her support, but she is trapped to him because he hasn't given her a divorce. Well, we'll put him under cherem. Let's see if a month, 6 months, whatever is needed, will convince him that maybe he should actually do what a Jewish person is meant to do and dissolve the relationship and allow both parties to live freely. It was used on a more mundane level than we would normally associate with the word cherem. And it was a very effective tool, especially in the pre-modern times when Jews had to rely upon each other for everything. If I'm living in a Jewish community, chances are I need the Jewish butcher. I'm going to the Jewish greengrocer. I'm selling my shoes to a primarily Jewish customer base. And if all of that is stopped because of a cherem, because of excommunication, I'm going to seriously consider complying with whatever the court has ordered and change whatever my behavior is that has caused this problem. But only exceedingly rarely was it used in cases like Spinoza, where the charge was heresy. Spinoza is one. Early Hasidism was put under bans by many, including Vilna HaGaon, the great rabbi of the Baltic states, Rabbi Kaplan of the conservative movement, when he founded Reconstructionists, was put under cherem by the Orthodox Union of Rabbis in the United States. But it doesn't happen all that often, and usually it is kind of a publicity stunt in most of the modern context. Historically, you didn't find a great deal of excommunication over ideas for most of Jewish life. For most of Jewish life, conversation was loud, raucous, and divisive about many theological issues. And apart from the occasional people tipping over questions about Maimonides, most of us were willing to at least hear the other person, even if we vehemently disagreed and wouldn't hire them as a teacher for our kids because we thought they were so wrong. But we still davened with them in shul, we still did business with them, we still interacted with them. Cherem for heresy was exceedingly rare. But along comes Spinoza then. We have to explain the exception which proves the rule. Spinoza lived in the 15th, 16th century, the 16th, 17th century. Always do that historical part wrong. And he was part of the expat community in Holland, in the Netherlands. That is to say, his family had originated in Portugal, and from the expulsion in 1492, his family, along with thousands of others, had fled, and many of them ended up in the Netherlands, which had a slightly better reputation for religious toleration than the Spanish and Portuguese communities of the Iberian Peninsula during that time. And in that community, Spinoza was a seeker. He was somebody who wanted truth above all else. He was within the Jewish community, but he was willing to search for truth among any of the sources. So he read Descartes, and he read the other philosophers of his day, and he read through all of the classics and wanted to understand reality as best as he could, and put together a whole system for doing so. And in this discussion, he came to a conclusion that was considered to be rather difficult. It was the idea that God was not beyond this world, but God was in this world. In fact, everything was God. That God was infinite, and therefore God was infinitely present in everything, not just a person, but in the table, in the floor, in the sky, in everything around us. It's a concept known as panentheism. Right? Not pantheism, that's believing in multiple gods, but panentheism, the idea that God was everywhere in the world, but he had a strict version of this, which essentially limited God to the universe. And that was something that no one else in the Jewish community agreed with at the time, because we still believed of God being beyond this universe. Yes, God was present. God was certainly immanent, meaning accessible to us at all times in all places. But God's ultimate essence was not limited by the bounds of this physical universe, but God's essence extended far beyond the limits of this universe. So obviously, he was not exactly welcome to give a dafar on Shabbos. He was not somebody that was looked to as a teacher of Jewish tradition, but within the Jewish community, he was still okay-ish. Except he was, as part of this free thinkers organization, also in great conversations with non-Jews. And that was a problem, because now he is joining together with Christians, or former Christians, who were embracing a version of atheism at the time, and the Christian leadership of the Netherlands were not happy about that, because now his ideas were infecting other people. Now his ideas were radically dangerous. Yes, even in so-called religiously tolerant Holland, there were still severe limits on the freedom of religion and the freedom of expression. And so Spinoza's ideas were getting him in trouble with the non-Jewish leadership of the community. And the non-Jewish leadership of the community came to the Jews and said, you know, this guy Spinoza, he's a problem. And if he's a problem for us, he's a problem for you. The Jewish community is like, well, no, we don't agree with him. We don't necessarily like what he's teaching. But I mean, you know, so? And they said, no. You fix the problem or else. Not or else we'll do something to Spinoza, or else we'll do something to the Jewish community. You are all responsible for what he is saying, so unless you make it clear that he is outside the boundaries of your community, we will hold your community responsible and punish your community for his thoughts and statements. And that is why the Jewish community put him under a ban, put him under excommunication. They were afraid that here in Holland, where they had found some measure of ability to live Jewishly from the places that they had fled, that would be taken away from them if they didn't follow through with the instructions, with the order, the demand of the Christian leadership of that community. And so they convened and they put Spinoza under a ban of cherem, of excommunication, in order to placate the local authorities. Now there is a layer of irony to all of this, which is that Spinoza's teachings went on to be among the most influential for the creation of what we now call the Enlightenment. That Spinoza's radical attempt to look past the conventions of his day and the normal preoccupations of the average people and the leadership means that he radically understood the divinity and the importance of each and every individual in a way that the communities prior to him, especially in Christian Europe, had never embraced. After all, they were willing to punish all of us for one of us. They didn't see a distinction between individual and community, but Spinoza did. And so Spinoza, in his teachings regarding freedom, in his teachings regarding the pursuit of an individual's path, helped inspire the people that you probably know better, of John Locke and Stuart Mill and others that would eventually come to found ideologies and philosophies that would lead to the establishment of these United States and many of the freedoms that were enshrined within our Constitution and Bill of Rights. In particular, that First Amendment, the right to free speech, to not be censured by the government because what you have said was considered to be heretical to the powers that be, and the right to exercise your religion in the way that you wish to exercise your religion, even if the government is not happy about your particular choice. Ultimately, if we trace the origin of those, one of the grandfathers, certainly not the only, but one of the grandfathers of these ideals is Spinoza. Somebody who was punished because of the structure that we lived in, that allowed the punishment of an individual to try and exonerate a community because a community could be punished for the crimes of an individual, eventually helped found the ideology that would give us a freedom that said that is nonsense. That each person is allowed to think what they want to think. We are allowed to disagree, and within our own small community, we are allowed to put certain boundaries and barriers. After all, if somebody came to me and said, you know, Rabbi, I'm Jewish, but I also believe in Jesus, can I have an aliyah? The answer is going to be no. We are allowed to have those types of limits. We are allowed to restrict what someone will choose to say on behalf of our community from the Bima. But we also recognize that we are in a blessed place where at least the government cannot kick down our doors and check our prayer books to make sure they are following the official government version. And that has happened at other times in Jewish life, in many other places and eras. We live in a world that has been crafted by the ideas of Spinoza precisely because what he was teaching with regards to personal liberty did have that seed of truth. As we saw in this week's Torah portion of Nitzavim, God finishes this whole section through the words of Moses by reminding us we have a choice. Each of us has a choice. Yes, there are consequences to choosing wrong, but God has not tied our hands behind our back, preventing us from choosing wrong. God allows us each and every day and each and every person to choose life over death, to choose good over bad. Understanding that radical notion of free will is ultimately coming out of the ideas of the Enlightenment of which Spinoza spawned. Now, there's a whole other offshoot of the fact that Spinoza was a radical fatalist and believed in predestination, or determinism, but that's a whole other conversation and a place where he was radically wrong. But he was right in this one element, that ultimately the individual has to find their way. We can be grateful for the guide and gift of Torah, but it is not something that guides us purely by rote or purely by adherence to what the community seems to be doing around us. It is something that has to be grabbed, seized, and understood each individually, and then protected and lived each and every day in our own life. And we must always protect the freedom to say what we want and to be able to believe and act as we want in order to ensure that we have that true freedom to live up to the call that the Torah has put before us in this Torah portion as well as in many others. So, I disagree with Spinoza. He's not my go-to philosopher, but I am thankful for what he did, and I am thankful for the place that he plays within the pantheon of those who have led to the freedom that we currently enjoy. And I will continue to defend his right to say what he said, even if I disagree with much of its content. Shabbat Shalom.